Hi, class. I am here today to talk to you a little bit about a book that we're starting this week, right? The Eric Maisel book, Creativity for Life, and the subtitle is Practical Advice on the Artist's Personality and Career from America's Foremost Creativity Coach. So, this book I have found to be really an interesting read for someone who wants to maintain creativity throughout one's life. And by creativity, as he talks about in the opening pages, we're not talking about everyday creative, as he calls it. We're not talking about someone who uses his or her imagination to solve problems on a daily basis and works maybe in, I don't know, the financial industry or something like that. Everyday creative, while it is commendable, is not what we're talking about in the class. In other words, that kind of personality uses creativity on a daily basis, but isn't creating art objects in the way that we're talking about poems in this class, for instance. And we're also not talking about the art-filled life, as he calls it on Roman numeral 11. Art-filled life, someone who goes to, let's say, a lawyer who works in his law office during the day and at night often goes to the opera, the symphony, goes to Lincoln Center, spends a lot of time supporting artists, and has filled his life with art, but isn't making it necessarily. So it's not that we're talking about either, although that's equally commendable and important in terms of supporting artists. What we're really talking about is an art committed life. And by art committed life, we mean that we're identifying as an artist, that we're producing, that we are creating works on a regular basis, and for the long term is a point I want to keep coming back to and keep stressing throughout any discussion. So, an art committed life is one in which I have decided to make art a priority in my life. And for me, it's been poetry and nonfiction. And to commit myself to exploring what nonfiction is, what poetry is, writing on a daily basis, which is a very big challenge, especially if you do it for 10 years, and then what do you do for the next 10 years and the next 10 years? So I'm trying to look long term in my commitment to an art committed life. Also, I want to throw in as a very important initial idea here that that we can be art committed in different ways with different arts at different times. So I may have poetry as my foundation, but I also, as I said, write nonfiction, and I'm also interested in film criticism, for instance, which I feel like is a form of nonfiction writing. I'm also interested in painting. I'm interested in music. I play music on a regular basis and sing music on a regular basis. And so the idea of being completely and utterly specialized and beholden to my specialization is something that I, in my life, have questioned for years. So I want to put that out there. Now, Maisel goes about his project in this book first and foremost by exploring who the artist is. And so in weeks 4, 5, and 6 of our class, which is starting this week, we are exploring, making initial forays into the exploration of what it means to you to be an artist. What are the personality traits of the artist? And he goes through some of that on page, and I'm going to get the page in a sec. He goes through the puzzle of personality and talks about what that means in relation to an artistic life on page 27. So he goes through 10 traits of the artist that he considers important to talk about and for us to think about in relation to our own art. So intelligence is the first one, introspective stance, discipline, honesty, empathy, self-centeredness, self-direction, assertiveness, resiliency, and non-conformity. So in his exploration of what it means to be an artist, he starts with what it means to have an artistic personality. And these are some of the traits that he explores. Weeks 7 through 10 in our class, we're talking about the work. So this book's second section is the challenges of the work, meaning craft. What is craft? How do I deal with creative block, which all of us in an art-committed, long-term life will have to approach. We'll have to figure out a stance for. Resistance and business at work and the artist's work. And then he goes on and talks about relationships, which we will end the class talking for 1 week about relationships. In other words, an art-committed life first means to understand my personality and what I feel about certain personality traits and how much of that trait I have. And secondly, it means to think about our social situation, especially romantic situation, and come to some terms about what it means to have a priority as an art-committed person, right? But also have a strong bond with another human being. And those two things are often at odds. And so what do we do? How do we deal with that? And thirdly, how do we deal with the work in and of itself in the creative process, which is endlessly fascinating to me. Process is amazing to study and to think about. And I look to all kinds of artists for their processes. And I read many different books about it. About what an artistic process means to a painter, for instance, to a musician, to someone who crafts clay, to someone who acts. You know, I've learned a lot about poetry from how actors speak about their craft. So I just want to lay this out in a very general way right now, not getting to any specifics, and say that those are the 3 areas that we will talk about in the class. And we will talk about some of them in great detail and some of them not so much detail. So in a 15-week class in which everyone's writing poetry as a primary activity, there isn't a whole lot of time to talk about all these things, but there is some time. And I do want to spend the time doing that. Also, undergirding all 3 of these areas of the art-committed life, from the personality of the artist and what creativity means and what talent means, to the work, to relationships, undergirding all of it in this book is a process called guided writing. And I would like to point this out in this video very briefly to say that the aspects of guided writing, which begin on page 279 of the book, these are really getting at some of the great difficulties and challenges of creativity, of what it means to be an art-committed person. And his purpose, Maisel's purpose as I see it, is to expose and confront and solve obstacles or problems that are getting in the way for me to attain my highest, most creative self. Guided writing works through many of those processes. And though he doesn't consider the exercises necessarily as the guided writing part, and you can look on page 279, and he goes through a 15-point action plan for a guided writing action plan on 280 and 81. You can look towards those. The exercises are not necessarily considered part of this, but to me they are essential. So this week we're talking about self-doubt, and we're talking about, in our exercises, about negative thoughts. If I can't come to terms to some degree about self-doubt and negative thoughts, then I have a real impediment towards living an art committed life, because those thoughts will permeate everything that I do. And so that's why we're starting off in this portion of the class with the self-doubt exercise and the negative thoughts exercise, which you will find in assignments and in the discussion forums. Okay, so here's where we're beginning with all of this, and I'd like everyone to, or my hope is that everyone learns something vital to her or his creative process and the commitment to that creative process through this really interesting, challenging, and complicated book. So I hope it's useful to you. I hope you find a lot of things that you can use throughout your life in this book, and that you keep it for your creative life. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the discussion forums.